The wind cut through the empty bus station like a sharp whisper, lifting fine snowflakes into swirling patterns that danced under the dim amber streetlights. Clara Wren pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders, shivering as her scarf slipped and tangled against her neck. Her gloves were damp, her shoes soaked from the slushy snow, and the biting cold seeped into her bones, wrapping her in a quiet, relentless ache. She hugged herself, rocking slightly on the spot, trying to convince herself she wasn't utterly alone. The hum of distant traffic was faint, hollow against the silence, and somewhere far off, a lone dog barked, the sound swallowed by the snow's soft blanket. She glanced down the empty platform, hoping for some sign of warmth, of someone who might notice, someone who might care. Her eyes caught the reflection of light on wet pavement and then, for the briefest moment, she thought she saw a figure standing near the station entrance. A man, tall, perfectly still, hands buried in pockets, watching. She felt exposed, her heartbeat thrumming in sudden alarm, but something in his quiet presence held her gaze. There was no judgment in it, no hurry, just awareness. Adrian Kane adjusted his scarf against the cold, the leather of his gloves creaking as he shifted his weight. He had arrived minutes ago, his sleek black coat dusted with snow, his polished shoes leaving dark prints on the white-tinged platform. A 27-year-old CEO with a life built on precision and order. Yet tonight, he was drawn inexplicably to the fragile figure before him. There was no immediate reason, no obligation or expectation, but he could feel a tug in his chest, an almost instinctual urge to close the distance between them. His eyes softened as he noted her trembling, the way her fingers clutched at her coat, and he knew she could not endure the cold much longer. Clara's breath came in shallow clouds, each one fading into the air almost before it formed. She tried to remind herself that she could wait for the next bus, that someone would eventually come along, but the snow seemed heavier now, the cold sharper, pressing against her fragile resolve. She wrapped her arms around herself again, shoving her hands beneath her coat, feeling the damp fabric cling to her skin. Each gust made her teeth chatter. Each flash of passing headlights made her flinch. She had not expected kindness tonight. She had not expected notice at all. Adrian took a careful step forward, boots crunching against the icy surface. He stopped a few paces away, close enough that she could feel his warmth if she dared, distant enough not to startle her. "Get my jacket and come with me," he said, voice low but steady, carrying a weight of quiet certainty. It was neither a demand nor a question. It was an offer, simple and unadorned, yet it carried the promise of safety, of a small mercy in the merciless night. Clara froze, startled. Her gaze flicked to him, and she saw no condescension, no pity, only concern. The sight of someone else willing to meet her fragility with calm patience unsettled her, yet a part of her longed to accept. The snow fell faster now, powdered flakes brushing her hair and clinging to her lashes. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edges of her coat. A lifetime of self-reliance and silent endurance whispered that she should refuse, that she could survive alone. But the ache in her limbs, the sting in her lungs from the cold, and the unspoken understanding in his eyes wove together a thread of possibility. Trembling, she allowed herself to step forward, toward the warmth he offered. Adrian extended his coat, heavy and pristine, letting it drape partially over her shoulders. The leather was cool at first, stiff with the night's chill, but the cut and weight of it promised shelter. Clara adjusted, feeling the fabric settle, the faint scent of cedar and musk rising from him, subtle yet grounding. Her body relaxed fractionally, a small exhale that carried more relief than she realized. For the first time tonight, she was not fighting the cold alone. The world outside seemed to pause for a heartbeat, the hum of traffic dimming, the harsh gusts softened as if the snow itself had grown respectful. Adrian's gaze held hers with steady patience, noticing the smallest tremors of discomfort, the quiet wariness behind her green eyes. Without speaking, he turned and she followed, boots crunching through the wet snow, the weight of his coat draping her like a promise of care, a silent acknowledgement that some strangers could be safe, that some moments could hold unexpected grace. She wanted to ask him why, to question the kindness of someone who owed her nothing, but no words came. Her lips parted, then closed, and the cold wind seemed almost secondary to the quiet intensity of the shared space between them. Each step forward felt like a surrender to something both terrifying and vital, a recognition that letting someone see you shiver, letting someone take your hand, could be a beginning. The bus station receded behind them, pale yellow lights fading into the curtain of falling snow. Clara felt her pulse slow slightly, the tension in her shoulders loosening, yet the uncertainty remained. She did not know this man, and yet somehow, she trusted him enough to walk toward warmth, to leave the cold behind. The weight of the coat around her felt heavier with significance, not just as fabric but as a bridge, fragile and tentative, between two lives momentarily aligned. And then, just as she allowed herself a flicker of hope, the platform lights flickered, the wind carried a sharp whistle through the station, and a sudden memory, a whisper of fear, a shadow of doubt, tightened around her chest. She paused mid-step, glancing up at Adrian. Her voice caught somewhere between gratitude and uncertainty, and in that frozen instant, the world seemed to hold its breath with her. The taxi ride was quiet, punctuated only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional scrape of snow against the tires. Clara sat huddled under the weight of Adrian's jacket, hands tucked beneath its warmth. Her legs curled close as if she could fold herself small enough to disappear. Outside, the city streets glistened with wet reflections, amber streetlights stretching across icy puddles, painting the world in transient gold. She had barely dared to look at him, and yet, each glance she stole revealed a calm presence, a steadiness that made her pulse slow and her thoughts untangle, however briefly. Adrian noticed her shifting uneasily beneath his coat, the way her shoulders curved inward as if she could shield herself from everything at once. He kept his eyes on the road, but the edges of his vision captured the tremor of her hands, the way her breath caught when a sudden gust rattled the window. He had long grown used to control, over schedules, over people, over the minutiae of his life. But this fragile human moment reminded him that some things were neither predictable nor manageable. He allowed himself a quiet relief, a small sense of purpose that was neither boastful nor loud, simply attentive. When they arrived at his apartment, the warmth hit Clara like a tangible force. The door opened to a cascade of amber light, soft and forgiving, spilling across the entryway. She removed her shoes slowly, careful not to drip the melted snow across the polished floor, and shivered as the air shifted from biting cold to gentle warmth. Adrian stood nearby, letting her move at her own pace, a quiet sentinel whose presence asked nothing yet offered everything. The coat slipped from her shoulders, and she held it close for a heartbeat longer than necessary, as if letting go would somehow expose her entirely. From the corridor came a soft, tentative voice. "Uncle Adrian?" A small boy emerged, no more than 5, with a mop of dark hair and wide, curious eyes. Milo, Adrian's nephew, had a natural instinct for innocence, for sensing the edges of human unease. He paused, tilting his head at Clara, and then, without hesitation, walked forward, small hands clutching a mug. "Hot chocolate," he offered, the steam curling upward, warm and fragrant. Clara's fingers brushed the cup, and for a moment, she felt a wave of something almost forgotten, comfort. Adrian smiled faintly, watching the exchange. Milo's presence softened the edges of the room, filling the quiet spaces with small gestures that carried more weight than words. Clara accepted the mug, feeling the heat seep into her fingers, her hands trembling slightly less with each sip. The room smelled of cocoa and vanilla, of polished wood and the faint musk of leather, mundane, yet deeply reassuring. She realized that warmth did not come only from coats or cups but from human attentiveness, from small acts that reminded her she could be seen without pretense. They moved into the living room, where the soft glow of a single candle flickered against the walls, shadows dancing like gentle ghosts across the space. Clara found herself seated across from Adrian, Milo perched beside her on the couch, hands folded politely, but eyes alight with quiet curiosity. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but expectant, a fragile tension that suggested anything could be spoken if the right words came. Clara allowed herself to breathe slowly, feeling the room's warmth seep into her chest, thawing the icy tightness that had settled there. Adrian broke the quiet first, his voice low, careful not to startle. "Snow can make the city feel endless, can't it?" Clara nodded, hesitant, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. She didn't answer immediately, only allowing a small exhale to escape, a soft acknowledgement that she had been noticed, that her presence mattered even in its fragility. Adrian's gaze lingered without insistence, a quiet patience that mirrored the candlelight's slow, steady flicker. It was not pity she saw, but understanding, a gentle acknowledgement of survival, of endurance. Milo, oblivious to the deeper currents, nudged a small box toward Clara. "I made this for you," he said, opening it to reveal a carefully folded paper snowflake, edges slightly jagged, imperfect but heartfelt. Clara's lips curved into a tentative smile, a rare crack in the armor she carried silently. The gesture was small, yet it carried a force she had not anticipated. The boy's simple offering, the warmth of cocoa, the flicker of the candle, and Adrian's quiet presence wove together a sense of belonging she had not known she could feel again. Time seemed to stretch, soft and pliant, as they shared these small, quiet moments. Clara sipped her chocolate, letting the heat anchor her. Adrian observed the subtle shifts, the easing of her shoulders, the faint sparkle in her eyes, the way she dared to lean slightly toward the candle's glow. Each gesture, each silence, became a building block in a bridge between isolation and trust, a connection neither rushed nor demanded, yet profoundly felt. Outside, the wind continued to sweep the streets with indifferent ferocity, the snow piling in drifts against lampposts and car hoods. Inside, however, the room breathed differently, a space where cold could not penetrate, where quiet kindness reshaped perception. Clara realized, with the faintest catch in her chest, that she could accept warmth without fear, that letting someone care need not diminish her strength. And yet, as she sat between Adrian and Milo, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes, a tiny shadow of doubt lingered. A whisper reminding her that safety was never guaranteed, that moments like this were fragile and fleeting. Her gaze flicked to the window, to the swirling snow beyond, and she understood that the true test had not yet come. She had stepped into warmth, yes, but whether she could remain there, fully, without retreating, remained uncertain. She drew the mug closer, inhaling the cocoa's scent, and allowed herself a slow, steadying breath. Adrian's eyes met hers briefly, calm and expectant, and she felt the quiet gravity of possibility settle between them. Outside, the wind howled, the world remained indifferent, and yet here in this small, fragile cocoon, Clara felt a first, tentative pulse of trust, a fragile ember against the cold that had defined her nights. Morning light crept gently through the curtains, dusting the room with a soft gold that made the shadows retreat. Clara stirred beneath the warmth of the coat she had insisted on keeping, the fabric heavy but comforting, as if it carried the quiet assurance of the night before. Outside, the snow lay thick, untouched in places, sparkling like scattered diamonds under the weak winter sun. The chill had not yet left the city, but inside, the apartment was soft with heat, aroma of cocoa lingering, and the faint scent of cedar from Adrian's coat still clinging to the air. Clara rose slowly, careful not to disturb Milo, who had fallen asleep cross-legged on the couch, his small chest rising and falling in even rhythm. She moved toward the kitchen, boots silent on the polished floor, and Adrian appeared in the doorway, crisp white shirt slightly rumpled, sleeves rolled up, eyes quietly observant. There was no need for words. His presence alone carried a calm steadiness that wrapped around her like a second layer of warmth. "Tea?" he offered, voice low, casual, but carrying the weight of gentle routine. Clara nodded, letting herself be guided, letting herself linger in the mundane intimacy of shared morning rituals. Water boiled, steam rose in curling tendrils, and she watched as Adrian poured tea into 2 cups, the faint clink of porcelain against countertop punctuating the quiet room. There was a rhythm to it, unspoken yet deliberate, as if these small gestures could stitch together the frayed edges of her night-shaken nerves. They moved to the table, Milo now awake and rubbing sleep from his eyes, still clutching a threadbare stuffed rabbit. Clara poured sugar into her tea, the granules slipping like tiny crystals, and for the first time since the station, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. The moment was unremarkable to anyone outside these walls, but inside, it was a sanctuary. Tea steamed between them, the aroma mingling with the soft hum of the heater, filling spaces that had felt hollow for months. Adrian studied her over the rim of his cup, noticing the faint tension around her eyes, the cautious way her fingers traced the cup's edge. "You don't have to speak if you don't want to," he said softly, a quiet invitation rather than an instruction. Clara hesitated, swallowing a lump of words, and then allowed herself to share the smallest pieces of herself. Not her whole story. There were still walls to protect, but fragments. Her mother, long absent, her fears of being forgotten, of being overlooked in a world that often moved too fast. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but Adrian listened with such intent that she felt the weight of her confessions dissipate slightly into the amber-lit room. Milo, ever perceptive, leaned over the table and laid a small hand over hers, a touch that needed no words, simple and innocent, anchoring her in the moment. Clara's lips curved again, this time with an ease that had not appeared before. The boy's quiet energy was a bridge, a reminder that trust could grow in small increments, in tiny gestures, in attention given without expectation. The candle flickered beside them, its flame dancing across walls and eyes, casting their reflections together, as if the room itself acknowledged this tentative connection. The morning stretched, unhurried. Adrian poured more tea, Milo giggled softly at his own clumsy attempts to stir sugar, and Clara allowed herself to watch them, to breathe, to exist in a space where she could simply be. Conversation drifted naturally toward harmless topics, books, weather, the curious resilience of city birds against snow, but beneath it flowed an unspoken current of acknowledgement. Both adults recognized the scars in one another, mirrored in subtle gestures. The faint tightness of Adrian's jaw, the careful way Clara avoided leaning too fully, the pauses before words that mattered. Later, the room quieted again, Milo having wandered to the couch with his rabbit. Clara sat across from Adrian, both of them aware of the silence, yet comfortable within it. She traced the rim of her cup absent-mindedly, watching the steam rise, twisting into ephemeral shapes that dissolved as quickly as they formed. Adrian's gaze followed the movement, noting her attention to detail, her quiet absorption in small acts, a reflection of resilience, of carefulness, of a life lived cautiously but deeply. "You know," he said finally, voice soft, "you're stronger than you think, and maybe, just maybe, it's okay to let someone see that strength." Clara looked up, startled not by the words but by the honesty behind them, by the quiet recognition that someone had noticed her without judgment, without presuming to fix what had not yet been broken. She swallowed, letting a small wave of emotion rise and fall, acknowledging the rare comfort in being understood. Outside, the snow began to soften under the pale sun, slush forming along the edges of the streets. Inside, the apartment retained its gentle warmth, a cocoon against the world beyond the walls. Clara felt a subtle shift, almost imperceptible but undeniable, a loosening of the tension in her chest, the easing of the armor she had carried since the station. She realized she could linger in safety, could exist without constant vigilance, could allow herself to connect in ways she had long denied. And yet, the awareness lingered, bittersweet and tentative, that this warmth was fragile, as delicate as the steam curling from her tea. She glanced toward Adrian, whose expression mirrored patience and attentiveness, and she knew that the bridge between them was still untested. The possibility of retreating, of letting the world reclaim its icy dominion over her heart, still lingered. The moment was real, yet the weight of reality remained just beyond the windows, waiting. Clara exhaled slowly, setting the cup down, her fingers brushing the table. Milo's laughter drifted from the couch, soft and innocent, anchoring her further in the room, in the moment, in the fragile trust that had begun to bloom. She dared, just barely, to imagine that perhaps the warmth could last. And then, as sunlight caught the edge of the candle's flame, throwing reflections across the walls, Clara realized. Maybe this was only the beginning. Maybe the real test of courage was not arriving at warmth, but choosing to remain, to open fully, when the cold would inevitably try to reclaim her. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, pale and hesitant against the lingering snow outside. Clara moved slowly through the apartment, her steps soft on the polished wood, mindful of the delicate calm that had settled since morning. She had begun to feel a small, tentative hope, an ember of trust glowing in the chest that had long felt encased in ice. Yet the ember flickered with uncertainty. Memories of disappointment, of being overlooked or left behind, pressed against her consciousness, whispering caution. She paused by the window, watching snow melting into rivulets, reflecting the fragile state of her own heart, half frozen, half thawing. Adrian watched her from the kitchen, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, his gaze gentle but probing. He had noticed the subtle shifts, the way her shoulders eased in small moments, and then stiffened again when shadows of doubt returned. He had built walls in his life too, careful, meticulous, ensuring that no one could reach too close and cause unforeseen fracture. And yet, for the first time, he realized he wanted to dismantle some of those walls, piece by piece, in quiet companionship rather than grand gestures. He remained silent, letting her space speak for itself, knowing that trust could not be demanded. It had to be coaxed. Milo bounded into the kitchen, small feet slipping slightly on the warm floor. "Can we build the snowman here?" he asked, holding a handful of cotton batting. The suggestion brought a reluctant smile to Clara's lips. She knelt beside him, rolling the soft material into rough shapes, the tactile act grounding her. Adrian joined them, crouching low, helping shape the pieces, his hands careful and precise, his presence steady. For a fleeting hour, the apartment became a haven of warmth, laughter threading between them, small victories against the cold both outside and within. But as evening drew near, a subtle tension entered the room. Clara's phone buzzed against the table, and she glimpsed a message that made her chest tighten. An offer, a reminder of responsibilities, a life pulling her in directions she had not yet abandoned. Her hand hesitated above the screen, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Adrian noticed instantly. He did not reach for the phone, did not ask questions, but the quiet line of his jaw and the faint crease between his brows spoke volumes. They both understood, without words, that the fragile harmony they had built was at risk of being disturbed. Clara looked down, trying to shrink into herself, but Milo tugged at her sleeve. "Don't go sad," he said simply, his wide eyes searching hers. She blinked, feeling an unexpected surge of protectiveness, of desire to preserve this moment not just for herself, but for the child who had unknowingly become a conduit of hope. She exhaled, attempting composure, but the pull of the world beyond the walls tugged at her, whispering the familiar refrain of impermanence. Adrian set his mug down and stepped closer, careful not to crowd, letting his presence be a quiet anchor. "You don't have to decide everything tonight," he said softly. "Some things can wait. Some things can be here now, without losing their weight elsewhere." Clara's lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came. Her green eyes met his steady gaze, and she saw neither judgment nor expectation, only recognition of her hesitancy, only acknowledgement that she had the right to feel torn. The tension between them was palpable, yet not harsh. It was the quiet friction of two humans navigating the delicate line between fear and hope. Milo, oblivious to the gravity of adult worries, continued building their makeshift snowman, humming softly. The faint flicker of the candlelight, dancing alongside the remaining sunlight, cast golden reflections across the room. Clara noticed the interplay of light and shadow, recognizing in it the subtle truth of her own heart. Moments of warmth could exist even amid uncertainty, could persist even when the world threatened cold intrusion. She allowed herself a long, slow breath, letting some of the anxiety ebb away, acknowledging that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to remain despite it. Evening fell fully, and the snowstorm outside softened to a gentle drift, the city's harsh edges muted by white. Adrian moved to the window, brushing his hand against the glass, frost melting under his touch. "It's quieter now," he murmured. "It always feels different after a storm." Clara stepped beside him, sharing the view. The light had changed, softer now, a pale reflection across the room and in her chest. She realized that storms would come again, inside and outside herself, but perhaps she could face them, step by step, with someone who understood the value of quiet presence. They moved to the living room, Milo curled up between them on the couch, and Adrian picked up a blanket, draping it gently across Clara's shoulders. She felt its warmth settle over her like a promise, and in that act, she sensed the culmination of small mercies. The jacket at the station, the cocoa, the candlelight, the careful attention that had built a fragile bridge across fear. She met Adrian's gaze and allowed herself to linger there, silently acknowledging the rare comfort of being seen without pretense, without expectation of performance or repayment. Hours passed, measured not by clocks but by the quiet rhythms of presence. Tea was sipped, stories murmured, and Milo's soft breathing finally signaled his drift into sleep. Clara and Adrian sat side by side, hands occasionally brushing over the blanket, the connection subtle yet profound. Words were unnecessary. The room itself held them, each gesture a testament to the fragile, painstaking rebuilding of trust. The apartment had become a sanctuary, a microcosm of hope where cold could not penetrate, where the heart could slowly open without fear of immediate rupture. Yet even in this warmth, Clara's mind hovered on the edge of the unknown. Tomorrow could bring obligations, demands, the return of coldness she had fought to escape. She glanced at Adrian, who met her gaze with a quiet patience that neither pressured nor assumed. The recognition of mutual fragility, of shared humanity, was enough to anchor her in the present. The storm had passed outside, and now, the storm within could be faced, not alone, but with careful companionship. Clara shifted slightly, resting her head against the blanket, eyes drifting toward the flickering candle. The snow outside sparkled, untouched, a promise of new beginnings. She realized that trust, once extended, was a living thing, delicate yet resilient, requiring patience and care but capable of sustaining warmth even when the world remained indifferent. The room held a soft, golden glow, each reflection on the walls and faces a quiet testament to survival, to connection, to hope. She drew a long, steadying breath, feeling the pulse of life around her. Adrian's calm presence, Milo's sleeping innocence, the gentle warmth that had seeped into her bones. And as she allowed herself that moment, she understood that the real triumph of the day was not dramatic, not loud, but quiet, persistent and luminous. The choice to remain, to let warmth take root, even when fear lingered at the edges. And in that quiet, flickering light, with snow falling softly beyond the windows, Clara smiled. The ember of hope had grown into a gentle flame, fragile yet steadfast, promising that even amidst uncertainty, hearts could still find warmth, and moments of belonging could last longer than a single storm.